Hello over the peak. A bit of a special this Monday to start us off, and this is GDP. I'm going to concentrate on the US GDP, but most countries do this in a very similar way. This is from the Bureau of Economic Research, the official people who pump out the official GDP numbers. And we knew from last week that the GDP came in as first estimate for the second quarter of this year came in at 1.3, I think. That's annualized rate of 1.3 for the second quarter. That's an estimate because they'll rejig things. So this opening chart is that 1.3 is registered there as the last blip. It is a coming up blip because they revised the previous estimate down an awful long way. That makes it look as though the last one, this 1.3, was quite good in comparison to the one before, but that's because they've just revised it down. But it's important to just get an idea from this chart, because I'm going to talk about lots of things. The general affair here, 1991, all the way realistically till the Great Recession, was positive GDP at about 3% average, something along those lines. There were years that it was up in 7 and 8% GDP increase quarter over quarter, and then you annualize them, and these are the annualized quarter numbers. You can see the big trough down is the Great Recession. Each blob represents a quarter coming down and then all the way back up again, and we can see it's then starting to turn down towards zero again. 1.3 is very bad, and it only slightly looks good because they revised the previous one down, but generally the trend is back towards zero, which is a lot lower than it normally is. Okay, let's kick into this and try and make it interesting. GDP, it's important because GDP is what, if you get 2 quarters of it, they'll call it a recession. If it's minus, it's important just to have those grey bars on the St. Louis Fed charts, if nothing else. I mean, we can have a really bad economy like it is now at 1.3. But it's not called a recession, even if it was 0.3, like it was 0.05 and things like that in the United Kingdom. They don't call it a recession because it's got to go below zero. But let's kick into it. This next one is the start of an explanation of what goes into GDP. What goes into, what figures do they get in to work out whether GDP is going up or down? And an important one is goods sold into the economy. And this is more to tell you that this is one of the components and it's goods, but you can also note that goods have gone negative at the end of this chart, and that's obviously not good. In goods, we have durable goods and non-durable goods. Durable goods, white work, you buy a fridge or something like that. Non-durable is an apple, for instance. And you can see the durable goods very, very much going down. People can't afford the big things. And non-durable goods obviously has got much less of a wobble to it. It's much more consistent. Services. So we've got goods and services going in here. Services is you buy an insurance policy or something, and you can see the vague shape of that it used to average about 3%, came down to average 2%, came down below zero in the recession, got itself up, and is on its way down again. You've got fixed investments, which is buying a factory, things like that. Again, the numbers are big in this because it's quite a lively one, but you can see it was plus 8 perhaps above the line all the way up to the recession, and it got below minus 30 in that Great Recession. It's a very lively indicator. You can see it bounced up to plus 20 after the recession, but now it's ticking its way down towards zero again. And in that fixed investment, we've got residential, equipment, software, structures, and non-residential. And I won't talk about it. I've just left those in there. You can just about pick out the Great Recession among all that noise. Okay, so in fixed investment, you've got residential, equipment and software, structures, and non-residential. Imports and exports are a component of GDP, and you can see the Great Recession just about visible in the difference between imports and exports, or imports and exports are there and they calculate the difference to put in as a factor for GDP. Government consumption, expenditures and gross investment is a component of GDP. You have a look at the vague shape of it. It didn't go down. There's no Great Recession to be found there. But interestingly, very recently, it trailed off badly, probably making quite a lot of impact on that first and second quarter of 2011 GDP number. Okay, so that's government consumption, expenditures and gross investment, which is broken down into federal, Washington spending, and state and local. Federal in blue, just a repeat of the last chart, and state and local. Now, I'm going to move dates now to bring it more up to date and talk about what's going on up to date. So moving off this federal, state and local going back to 1991 chart to the same chart, state and local and federal, but going only back to 2006. And I wanted to show you this because it's federal spending. It's got that big dip down that I think probably had some cause for the first two quarters of this year GDP when that went negative. But it's interesting to look at state and local and the trend of that. It started at about +2, but really you can see a very, very great trend down through 0, and now really trending at -2. An awful lot of spending has gone away from state and local government, and it hasn't even been made up by federal spending, although it's hard to say because the federal spending is so active. Next, residential spending, again since 2006. It's hard to talk about this one, but you can see in the recession it came down to below -30, very active again. But residential to a certain extent has come back in as an almost zeroed off component of GDP. Equipment and software, we know this from the goods and services, is very, very important, very, very important for jobs. If there's a big takeaway from this, this is the component to look at for jobs. Basically, if companies are buying equipment and software, it's for the new employees to use, or to get new employees. Yeah, it's for new employees to use, and it's a pretty good predictor of employment. You can see the Great Recession coming down, bottoming in first quarter 2009. It tried to struggle back up, but the equipment and software read component of GDP is going down, and that probably means that for the rest of this year employment will be going down, unemployment will be going up for the rest of this year, and you can almost be sure based on that equipment and software number. Durable goods and non-durable goods, just a repeat of what I said earlier. It's durable goods, which are expensive things. They're quite a big component, and people can't afford to buy them at the moment. That damaged the GDP number greatly, that durable goods number coming down, and even a bit of a coming down on the non-durable goods as well. That's just a repeat of equipment and software. I don't know why I put that in. Just to repeat, that's an employment read. Now, that's our GDP. What makes up GDP? So those are the numbers. That's nominal numbers that they've got, and they've got that in GDP, and they do that for each quarter, and they compare them quarter to quarter. But obviously, I won't talk about population, but inflation obviously has to be taken into account, because if there's an annual inflation of 5% and the GDP for the second year is 5% bigger than the first year, then there's no real GDP increase. It's all because of inflation. So it's very important to know what deflator number they're using for inflation, because if it's 5%, as I say, that makes it 0. But we know if they're going to be a bit naughty, what they'll want to do is pull that inflation number down as low as they can possibly get, because the lower they can possibly get it, if they can fudge it to be 3 when it was really 5, then they can call it 2% GDP increase, as opposed to if they called the entire inflation 5, then they'd get a 0 read. So the lower they can pull that deflator down, the better that overall GDP number is. And it is the annual, after the deflator is used, is the number that's announced on the television. Always there is the deflator used before the number is announced. So I go in to see what deflator number they are using, all from the same people, the BEA. And this is the implicit price deflators for gross domestic product, and you can pull out however far you want to go back, and you get that number across the top. It's chained to 2005 numbers, and you can see the deflator they're using for all of the different components of GDP that I've been talking about. But for the moment, I'll just talk about the main one for GDP in its entirety. So 2005 was 0 or 100, and you can see 2006 is 3.231. So they've used an annualized percentage of 3.231% for that year, 2005-6. I've downloaded, this is the last chart, I've downloaded that information to a spreadsheet and played with it to put in the annualized and quarterly numbers for the very recent ones, 2009, 10 and 11. Now, I'm not a genius at this, but I think I've got it right. The GDP is on line 1, and I've pulled down and put in the quarterly and the annualized quarterly numbers. So you can see for that 1.3 read that was so bad last week, the announcement, they're using an annualized deflator of 2.37%, which was a 0.59% quarterly deflator. But if we just think annualized, everything is annualized, that for each of these quarters, this is the inflation rate that they say pertained during that quarter, and that's what they've used as their deflator to give us the GDP number for the quarter. So they think inflation has been running at, working backwards, 2.37%, 2.7% at the start of this year. The first quarter was 2.7, which is high for them because the fuel costs could not be denied. But then going into 2010, and these are annualized, all under 2%. In fact, you know, getting smaller and smaller, 1.76, 1.31, 1.58, 1.5 going into 2009, 1.04, almost deflation at 0.23. And I think I'll have to check those numbers. Yeah, no, those are, that first number is, because I've just done a formula. I didn't look at it, but the formula is right. It says that it was actually deflation in the first to second quarter of 2009, inflation at minus 0.45. So the big question is, those are the GDP numbers that are put out at a very, very, very bad 1.3, just not, it's stall speed. It's certainly it's not takeoff. Keep going at that and it's inevitably going to go down. And that is looking that good because they've used such a low deflator of 2.37% for the annualized inflation rate for that time. Have you got all that? I'm sorry to bore you with all that, but I think it's an interesting thing to have in our minds, that all those things go into GDP, but it really doesn't matter as long as they fudge the deflator and the inflation deflator when it comes to calculating the final number. How about that for Monday? Right, see you tomorrow. Bye.